Hello and welcome to my series of videos on tilapia. This is part one. It's on production. I found that when I did my carp video that I put all of my three topics, production, biology, and nutrition, all in one video. It turned out to be quite a long video, a little bit difficult to handle it all. It makes it harder for people to watch it when it's so long. They have to come back and watch it maybe several times. And so by breaking up tilapia into, first of all, three parts on production, biology, and nutrition, it also allows me in the future to open up other new videos in different parts. And I have a lot of information about things like, for example, the tilapia gut microbiome and more specific details about many, many things that have been researched about tilapia. Without doing anything, saying anything more at this moment, I will start. Okay, here we go. Part one, production. So tilapia are part of a large family of fish called Cichlidae, and so they can be classified as cichlids. Now, cichlids in Africa, that's where they originate from. There's upwards of 1,200, 1,300 different species. The majority of them are in Africa, although some of them now are elsewhere. And the thing is that among all of these species of tilapias, there's only really a handful that are farmed in global tilapia production. So if we look at this table here, we see that carps are number one at 31 million metric tons, and then we have catfish and cichlids, or in other words, tilapia, somewhere around 6.5, 6.6 million tons. And catfishes, of course, that includes Pangasius, it includes Clarius catfish, different Silurus, the European catfish. It includes also the American channel catfish. So cichlids are coming in here at number three, and we see across time that the production has been quite consistent between about 6 to 6.5 million metric tons. So far, the data that I'm showing you is the most recent that I have available. So prior to about the 1980s, tilapia was really not a widely known species and certainly not involved much with aquaculture. But I think one of the key things that happened, and we'll be going into this a little bit later, is that uh, the hatchery production of tilapia turned out to be relatively straightforward, quite easy compared to many other species. So having a readily available supply allowed the beginning of domestication of tilapia, so that was one important factor. Then, once these successful breeds were being developed, then they were spread around the world, and aquaculture, of course, then began to boom. Uh, and finally, that turned out that tilapia meat, tilapia fillets, was a good fish to replace other white meat fish in the European and American markets, because some of the sea fish that they used to use previously, such as the Atlantic cod, became hard to find. And they found that tilapia was quite a good substitute for that. And we see here through the data through 2018 that the production worldwide had increased very, very substantially in a relatively short period of time, about 30 years or so. Now, looking at this graphic representation of global tilapia production, we see here, first of all, data from 2016 from Kevin Fitzsimmons, who's University of Arizona, very well known for his work on tilapia. And we see here China, we have Egypt, we have then the Philippines, Mexico, Thailand, Taiwan, Brazil, and Indonesia is also a very large producer. So we see the top three are looking here at the right-hand side. This is the data from this paper by Dr. El Sayed. He's working with the FAO as a consultant on tilapia. He's written several books. And then here we see also he's worked on this paper with Kevin Fitzsimmons from the University of Arizona. And this is a paper from 2023. And then there's a barcode. You can scan this barcode and it will find you a place where you can actually download this paper. So we see here that China, Indonesia, and Egypt are the world's three largest producers by far. So we have China 1.6 million metric tons, and then we have 1.26 million tons in Indonesia, and about 1.1 million metric tons in Egypt. And then the next seven producers are much, much smaller. Okay, so we have here global production by country, and this gives us a slightly different perspective because A, which is the first pie chart here, is top producers of specifically Nile tilapia. And B represents other species not including Nile tilapia. And so this one, of course, is very similar to what we saw in the previous graph on the previous slide. More or less the same list of countries. But when we go to the species other than Nile tilapia, this would include Mozambique tilapia, maybe blue tilapia, and hybridized tilapia and so on, that there's a lot more smaller countries involved because they're focusing on maybe not the really mainstream species. So they're focusing on ones that they have available to them. Now, when we are talking about tilapia aquaculture, 70 to 75% is the Nile tilapia itself. And then we have about 20% are red hybrid strains. So red hybrid strains are Oreochromis species, but they are a cross, a hybridized cross between Nile tilapia and the blue tilapia. So the blue tilapia is Oreochromis aureus, and it's about 5%. And then we have, finally here, 5% is the Mozambique tilapia, which is Oreochromis mossambicus. One of the things about tilapia also, it is very adaptable to many different forms of aquaculture. And what I'm showing you here are farms that I was actually involved with, either as are some R&D activities or visiting customers in various places in Thailand. And we can see that here we have in the pond, In this case, it's a very large, extensive pond. And what they have here is a barn. And in the barn, if you look closely here, you can see that they are producing layer chickens. So this is an egg farm. And then, of course, all of the feces from the chickens falls down into the water. And then the tilapia thrive on the productivity that those feces generate. We then see adaptable in this picture in Kanchanaburi. This is a fairly large farm. This was a farm that we were using for some of our R&D activities, and it's in an irrigation dam. So it's in a reservoir behind a dam, whereas this picture Angtong, Galasin, and Angtong again, and then also in one of the rivers in Laos. These are all cages in rivers. So as we saw on that previous one where we were looking and we see that we had most of the world's production is in the Oreochromis species, we actually have two genera of cichlids that have commercial value in aquaculture. We have uh, Tilapia, so that's genera number one, genus number one. And primarily we have Tilapia rendalii and we have Tilapia zillii. And we have pictures over here on the right-hand side. And then we have the Oreochromis. So this is where we have Oreochromis niloticus, aureus, mossambicus, and I note here that Oreochromis mossambicus, the Mozambique tilapia, is actually the most euryhaline. So euryhaline is an animal that can adapt across a wide range of salinities, from freshwater to even full strength seawater. And so that means that Mozambicus is grown in places where other tilapia, the freshwater tilapia, may not be really very suitable. And then we have various hybrids. So red tilapia are, as I mentioned, are mainly crosses between Oreochromis and aureus. And we can find them being developed in Taiwan. There are red tilapia hatcheries producing red tilapia in Florida. We have a number of them here in Thailand. And some countries favor the red tilapia because fresh fish or cooked, they have a much more attractive appearance. And in general, if we were to compare these two fish, in the past, I would have said that my fish would have been colored more like this, where competitors' fish would have been colored more like that. Now, I will get into carotenoids a little bit and how I'm able to make these fish so attractive. But if we're selling these in a fresh market and they are laid out, for example, in a tub or a tank, in general, the consumers will always buy the brightly colored ones first and leave these ones second. So we found that having, for those who like red tilapia, they like bright red colors. And that was something that I learned how to do quite well. So as we saw that there are other farmed tilapia species other than just the two or three mainstream ones, and these are some examples. Well, we have blue tilapia here. We've got mossambicus here. We have niloticus here. And then you can see that there's actually a number of other species that are grown in different parts of the world. Some of these are almost exclusive to Africa. Now, here I have some data from FishStatJ. Now, if you don't know FishStatJ, this is a program that you can download from the FAO. And there's the QR code. You can go and find it and download it either for PC or for Apple Mac. And then what you do is after you download the program, you download a workspace. So they give you a list of workspaces and you can pick and choose what you want. Like you can have fishery statistics, aquaculture statistics, or in my case, I've downloaded global fishery and production statistics version 2024. That's the most recent one. And then it gives us data up until 2022. So I look at this quite frequently when I'm trying to understand what's going on with different species. They have hundreds of different species, so you can search for Pangasius only. Where are in the world are they growing Pangasius? Where in the world are they growing tilapia? Where in the world are they growing bullfrogs? And so I really recommend that you go and find Fish.j and use it for your own work. Now, here we're talking about tilapia, and the FAO uses this word NEI to represent mixed species. So it's really, everything is all lumped together. And so here we see the data that I pulled out of the database from 2017 to 2022. We have production volume in metric tons, and then we have production value in terms of dollars. And we can see that we're almost $2 billion in 2022. So, as the name Nile tilapia implies, that the Nile tilapia originated in the headwaters of the Nile River in modern-day Egypt and Sudan. So that's in this area here. And then we have a number of very closely associated rivers going over here through the Congo and so on. And whether these rivers are connected into one just giant system. They're not necessarily so. But we always know that when we have incidences of heavy floods, heavy rain, and so on, that the fish are quite capable of moving from one river system to another. So over time, over generations, then they have migrated across through this area of over into West Africa. And then we also have the tilapia have come down through the Rift Valley, the Rift River lakes. So we have Lake Victoria, Lake Tanganyika, and Lake Malawi. And then the thing is that we have this overlap with the Mozambique tilapia. So just now you can recall that the Nile tilapia came down through this region right here. And the green here was representing the native range of the Mozambique tilapia. So as I mentioned, Mozambique tilapia is a fish that tolerates seawater. And so this is found all along the coast. And I have seen myself incidences where a small stream is draining into the sea. You have a tiny little estuary, and you can see the Mozambique tilapia digging burrows, digging nests right there, just 100 meters away from the ocean. So I mentioned earlier that even though these fish originated in Africa, now they have been distributed everywhere around the world. So here is the original range of the tilapia, and the Mozambique tilapia down through here and across through to West Africa. And you can see that they've been distributed everywhere. A lot in Central and South America, some in North America, and then scattered all through Asia, including a little bit in some of the Pacific Islands. Comparing that then to the Mozambique tilapia, once again, this is the native range down here. We see, once again, a lot of overlap in the Mediterranean, not the Mediterranean, in the Caribbean Sea and in Central America. But notice here now we see a lot more Mozambique tilapia distributed among the islands in the Pacific, and that's because these islands are very small and they don't really have any fresh water to speak of to grow the tilapia, but they can be grown quite well in either brackish water or up to full strength seawater. Tilapia are fully domesticated, and I think this is one of the reasons for the rapid success of tilapia. So, the original Asian tilapia, so we're not talking about Africa, we're talking about Asian tilapia breeding program, started in 1998 at the International Center for Living Aquatic Resource Management, or acronym was ICLARM. And this was in the Philippines. Now, they moved from the Philippines to Malaysia, and now they're known as World Fish Center, but they continue to work on their tilapia breeding program. So they called their program Fish Gift. So this was genetically improved farmed tilapia. 6 generations were produced in the Philippines, and then 17 generations have been produced in Malaysia. Actually, it's maybe a little bit more than that by now. And then after 5 generations, so only 5 generations, the final body weight increased by more than 80%. So you can see that this breeding program was very successful, and the faster fish grow, the better it is for the farmers and the more interesting this fish is. One of the things that makes it easy to domesticate is that it has a fully known life cycle. So we have our adults, we have our eggs, and one of the things that helps us quite a lot is that tilapia can be grown in cages, or breeders can be held in cages. They hatch eggs, but they lay eggs, and then the eggs are actually held inside the mouth, so they're called mouth brooders. And then this allows the hatcheries to manage eggs very well. They're transferred to incubators, and then the eggs hatched. The larval fish are very small at hatching, but they grow very, very rapidly. And then at about, let's say, a size of maybe 2 to 3 inches, then the fish will be transferred into cages or into ponds to grow out. So this is a very simple, relatively simple, and easy to manipulate life cycle. Now, just to give you an idea about the domestication of tilapia, let's just go back and look at a little bit of history. So, farming tilapia started in Egypt, and it's estimated to be more than 3,500 years ago. And worldwide production started in the 1950s. Now, look, it's only 1,500 metric tons, so very little. And as we saw from that previous graph, the production really didn't start taking off until about the 1980s. And the reason it started to take off in the 1980s was due to successful hormonal sex reversal for monosex tilapia farming. And then we have gift tilapia, started in 1988. Now, after 30 years, we see, as I mentioned previously, that the final body weight now is more than 80% more than it used to be. And hybridized red tilapia are popular in many countries. Tilapia can now be grown in anything from uh, zero salinity, basically like distilled water, all the way up to 60 parts per thousand salinity. And compared with that 1,500 metric tons that was produced in the 1950s, now we're over 4.2 million metric tons of Nile tilapia alone in 2016. So, Worldfish has this graphic showing the distribution of the gift breed of tilapia. And we see that mostly they have been distributed in the warm water countries of South and Southeast Asia, a little bit to Africa, and a little bit to South America. Now, I was involved in a training program, and we had a bunch of people from Egypt, and they said that the Egyptian government did not allow any externally bred tilapia to be introduced into Egypt, that they were only permitted to use the totally native species that they had. And when we were in our class, I mentioned to them that in Thailand, with the gift 4 or gift 5 that we have, and another species we have called Cichlidae, which I believe is Cichlidae 4 now, that we were able to get typically 6 to 8 grams of body weight gain per day. And the Egyptians said that because their breeding programs were much farther behind than ours, that they were only able to get 3 or 4 grams gain per day. So you can see that the fact that the gift tilapia is widely distributed means that it's able to generate a lot of tonnage of fish. Now, briefly, we'll talk about tilapia hatchery and its reproduction. So, monosex tilapia are preferred. And that's because male tilapia grow faster than females, and females are very prolific breeders. They will breed every few months if they are given the chance. The problem is that in preparation for breeding, females stop growing. So let's say you start some tilapia from a hatchery and they're mixed sex. The males will continue to grow continuously 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, whatever. But the females will generally stop growing at around 3 months, and then they will start preparing for spawning. So they begin then to divert all of their energy and all of their nutrition to preparing to lay eggs, and then they breed so prolifically that the offspring will rapidly overpopulate a pond. So when we talk about monosex tilapia, the main method that has been used for decades is that tilapia eggs and larvae are exposed to 17-methyl testosterone in their rearing water. The concentration of the testosterone in the water is very, very low, but nevertheless, it converts genetic females into phenotypic males. So they might be genetically um, female, but they appear and behave and grow as if they are males. So in one of the places that I visited, several of the hatcheries I visited, they will take this 17 alpha methyl testosterone, and the dose, as you can see, it's very low, 150 micrograms per liter for 3 hours, and that would typically produce more than 85% phenotypic males. And one of the things that the farmers do not like is what we call reversions. This is when the phenotypic male that was actually genetically female goes back and turns into a female phenotype again. So in order to raise this number as high as possible, one of the hatcheries I visited will then also feed the swim up fry fish meal, only fish meal, which has then been sprayed and mixed with more 17-methyl testosterone, so that when these fish start first feeding, they're actually getting more of the sex hormone, and then in some cases they might even extend that to the first uh, kind of real fish feeds, the starter feeds. But when they do that, they can actually get the reversion rate to be less than 3 or 4, not more than 5%. Now, the problem that we have is that monosex tilapia are banned in Europe. So for them, it's primarily an animal welfare issue, uh, but also a food safety issue because they're concerned about the use of the synthetic methyl testosterone. But the reality is that the amount of hormones dosed in such small fish is minuscule compared to the concentration of naturally circulating sex hormones in large fish, especially in females that are approaching sexual maturity. Now, of course, sex hormones are complex chemical structures. They're probably quite heat stable. And so then, even if the fish is cooked, in theory, the fact that those sex hormones are there, they might have a minor influence on us, for example, although we have our own circulating sex hormones. Now, this gives you an example of the benefit of using monosex populations versus mixed. So we see here in this graphic that when we look at all male monosex tilapia, that in the space of one growing season, which in this case is from March to April, that we have somewhere around, let's say, 100 grams for a mixed sex average or mean weight in the pond, where we're nearly double at 180 grams for all male. And males grow at nearly double the rate of females. And we can see that if we look down here in this table down here, we see initial weight, final weight, and total weight gain and daily growth rate. And we see the daily growth rate of the mixed sex, of course, this is males and females together, about 0.29 grams per day. But for the male monosex, it's 0.55, so not quite double. So this gives us a big advantage. We want to read this paper, go ahead and you can find it there. Now, there is a researcher who was living here in Thailand teaching at the Asian Institute of Technology named Dr. Graham Mayer. And he worked on an alternative called Tilapia supermales. So we have an all-male genetic XY fish called a Tilapia supermale, and it's produced, so there's genetic manipulation at this level, basically at the grandparent level. So we have a UV treatment and we have other things, maybe, I don't know, pressure, shock, whatever, uh, that interferes with the distribution of the chromosomes. And then we end up with XX females and YY males. And then if we take this YY male and we cross it with a normal XX female, we end up with this all male XY progeny. And this is okay for the Europeans because none of the manipulation is done at the level of this, which is what the consumer sees. And because we have this duplication of genes, for example, maybe twice the number of growth hormone genes or whatever, often we can see that gift will are slower growing even than these super males. But the super males are not welcome everywhere. Here in Thailand, the introduction didn't work out very well. They're not very well received here. But in other countries, especially those that are interested in exporting to Europe, this Y all male is a popular option to avoid using the testosterone treated fish. Now, the optimal environment for tilapia. So this is a paper. This is a graphic from the paper. They're looking at a number of different conditions. We see here that they've got pH, they have temperature, they have oxygen, and then they have soluble nitrogen. And so if we go and look at the data here, they say that the optimal range for growth is 26 to 31 degrees Celsius. Lethal minimum temperature is 10 to 11 degrees. So this is a fish obviously that cannot survive in temperate or cold climates except in certain places like in Europe where they might be growing these um, downstream from a power plant that is releasing a lot of heated water. And then we see at temperatures of 20 to 22 degrees Celsius, the growth rate of tilapia is reduced by 30% because their optimum range is somewhat higher than that. And when we talk about optimum range, this is the optimum range for digestion, for enzymes, activity, and so on, and metabolic rate. Now, on the other hand, if we push these fish to too high temperatures, uh, and it's reported here that at 37 to 38 degrees Celsius, the fish will become quite stressed, and then they'll be very susceptible to disease. And when we talk about stress, basically what happens here is that the enzymes, the metabolic enzymes and so on, speed up, and then everything becomes dysfunctional. Nothing is working together in all through the organism at the same rate, and then things begin to break down. Okay, moving on to oxygen, we see here tilapia tolerate very low dissolved oxygen down to 0.1 milligrams per liter. Now that is extremely low. However, in aquaculture, we would never, ever, ever want to see like that. So for maximum growth, we need to have dissolved oxygen over 3 milligrams, but 5 milligrams is recommended. And part of the reason is because as DO drops, feeding will go down. And if we keep putting feed in the pond at the same rate, even though the dissolved oxygen goes down, then the animal doesn't have enough oxygen for its digestive enzymes. It doesn't want to take in the feed, so then you end up having more feed being wasted. This just adds to more pollution in the pond and so on. Now, we have here pH and dissolved nitrogen, and these work together because when the water pH changes from, uh, let's say, acidic to alkaline, we have a conversion back and forth between ammonia, nitrite, and nitrate. And we see here that a pH of 7, that ammonia is less than 1% of total nitrogen. But as we go up, and here we have pH 10, it can be 80 to 90% as ammonia, and ammonia is quite toxic. And it causes a lot of problems with excretion of nitrogen by the fish, and the fish will just basically poison itself with ammonia that it in its blood and in plasma that it cannot excrete. So when we talk about duration of exposure, so it can temporarily accept an acute uh, uh, problem with dissolved nitrogen, but we also can see the situation where maybe the level isn't extremely high, but it's high for a long period of time. It's a chronic exposure. And we see here that it says more than 7 milligrams per liter is toxic, and that the maximum recommended in most freshwater species is actually only 0.2 milligrams of soluble ammonia per liter of water. So that's the end of this talk on production. And of course, because I would like to have these videos viewed by students and I would like to be able to help you to learn where to go to find more information, I'm always pleased when it's the right thing to give you resources that you can use. So let's just look and see what I have. Now, the first thing are these books that we have. This one, Tilapia, Biology, Culture, and Nutrition. Um, if you're not fortunate enough to be able to buy this book or have access through a institutional email or through a library, university library, or institutional subscription, you can find it at this barcode at the Internet Archive, where you cannot download it, but you can read it online. This is proceedings of a symposium. So we have the International Symposium on Tilapia Aquaculture. This is held pretty much every single year or every 2 years. And this particular one here is the 12th International Symposium, but they're publishing these proceedings and they have the full papers in them. So this is one that I'm recommending from 2019. Now, I did mention that Dr. Al Sayed is a consultant for the FAO. He's considered to be one of the world's leading authorities on tilapia culture. He is Egyptian. And so here we see Tilapia Culture, first edition of his book in 2006. It was updated in 2020. This is actually a very good book full of very useful information. Unfortunately, books published by the scientific publishers tend to be quite expensive. So hopefully you have access to a library, a university library, or some other library where you could find this book, or maybe you could borrow it from another library. And I also found this to be quite interesting. This is a PhD dissertation from United Kingdom, but the topic is for salinity tolerant breeding for salinity tolerant tilapia. And I found this to be quite interesting. So if you're living in a place where you want to grow tilapia in brackish water or in salt water, I really recommend you go and find this one. Now, here's another book. This one is quite new. This is 2021. It's published by Taylor and Francis Group. The red indicates that it is not available anywhere for free that I can find for you. But it's another book that is highly recommended and published by CRC Press. And then a couple of papers. One here, Tilapia Culture in Salt Water. And once again by Dr. El Sayed. You can find it here. And then in America, we have this one, South Dakota Cooperative Extension Service, Tilapia, Environmental Biology, and Nutritional Requirements. So that's basically a level of say, a high school student. So that's it for part one of tilapia production. And I've got a couple more that are coming up here very quickly. I would invite you to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Like the videos, that helps the channel grow. I appreciate your comments. Um, Whatever you may have to say, I do follow them and I do reply. Turn on notifications so that you know when I'm releasing new videos. And particularly if you're a student, whether high school or university student, please share this with your friends so that this information that I have can be used by everybody. So that's the end. Thank you very much.